Story 1. Alright, I'll try to keep this short, but it's got a lot of information, and I'm so proud of what happened I might ramble. In the spring, I decided to use a massage gift card at a local chain and scheduled one for 10 a.m. on a Saturday. Of course, I forgot about it until my alarm went off at 9:45, and I saw the calendar alert on my phone. Cue an enormous freak out because if you forfeit the cost of the massage, nearly $100 if you don't show. I woke up my husband and begged him to drive me because his car is parked right out back and mine is parked a block away. He begrudgingly got out of bed and we ran to the car. I arrived 20 minutes late and he agreed he would wait for me in the parking lot of the shopping center until I was done, since at this point my massage hour was nearly halfway over. My massage goes great, but when I come up to the desk to check out, the woman working there apologizes and says that while I was in the room, my husband received a boot on his car when he left the parking lot to grab coffee. She says it happens all the time, even to workers of the shopping center, because the towing guy just sits in his truck on the property and waits to boot people. She said she ran out there and tried to stop it and argue with the guy that I was a paying customer, but the towing operator just laughed at her. They gave me half off the massage for the trouble. I run out and hope to argue our case. My husband is pissed. The operator told him he would remove the boot if his boss said he could, so my husband called and tried to explain, but the minute he admitted to leaving the property, the boss said, "I have you on tape admitting you left the parking lot. You're screwed. Nothing you can do. Pay to remove the boot." I tried to defuse the situation by explaining that I was a paying customer, and thus we didn't technically break the rules of the parking lot. The towing guy says we have to pay, but that we can argue our case by calling the office afterwards. We pay. When we get home, I call the office and explain, and the guy who answers just says, "I talked to your husband. He's a jerk. Maybe if he hadn't been such a jerk, I would do something about it. You can try and call back tomorrow and speak to a different manager, but I don't know if they'll help you either." Great! Now I'm fuming. My husband is pissed, and it's my fault for making him drive me in the first place. I proceed to do a ton of research on towing laws and reporting fraud. I filed a report with the BBB. I emailed the owner of the company. I filed a report with the city of Chicago. I do everything I can think of, and then I just forget about it. $140 is a chunk of change since my husband is in full-time graduate school and I'm working long hours to make ends meet, but we'll survive. 2 months later, I got an email from the city saying that they reviewed my claim and they sided with the towing company, but that I can call to dispute. I do. Tony, the guy handling my complaint, tells me that the towing company sent over a recording of me. The tape is listed with my name and case number, where I admit to leaving the shopping mall parking lot. I tell him, that's impossible. I literally never left the parking lot, so there's absolutely no way you could have a tape that has me admitting that. I tell him my whole story. Tony says he will discuss it with his manager and get back to me. I get a call later in the day, and it's Tony again. He says that he listened to the tape again, and that something isn't right. The woman on the tape the towing company sent over admits to leaving the parking lot to go to the liquor store across the street and buy wine. So it's not me. He strongly infers that they're trying to screw me over, without actually saying it, and says that he told them to send the correct tape by the end of the day or refund me my money. Tony calls again the next day and says that he can't legally be the middleman, but that I should call the company and give them my information and they'll send me a check. I do. I'm sweet as sugar to the grumpy man on the line. 1 week later, a check comes by certified mail. I leave a voicemail for Tony worshiping the ground he walks on for believing me and fighting for me. I know this might seem lame, but to anyone who has ever had to deal with a shady towing/booting company, it's the biggest win possible. I was walking on air for weeks. Story 2. So I just started my collection of NeoPixel lightsabers. These have lights in the actual blade, so they extend and retract like a real one would do. They can be quite expensive depending on which one you get. I took my new one outside last night after it got dark. I like to swing it around like a majorette in a parade. I'm not that good yet, but it sure is fun to do. My new one is black, so I like to leave it on the Kylo Ren setting cause it looks cool. I'm outside, doing my best to spin it around and try something new, spinning it while holding it at the end of the hilt near the pommel and speaker. A kid appeared in the gateway of my front garden watching me. He must have been like 8 or something. He was in awe. His mom turned up too, and they watched me for about a minute or so before the kid tugged his mom's arm pointing at me. I knew what was about to go down, so I turned the saber off and went to head back inside. Entitled Mother, that's very cool. Where did you get it? Me. Oh, I got it from an online store called Padawan Outpost. They got all kinds of different ones on there. Character sabers from the movies, made up ones like this, loads, for good prices too. My baby likes your one. Yeah, they still have it in stock. It's about 130 pounds or something though. Comes in different colors too, not just black for the hilt. No, he likes your one. Give it to him. Excuse me? No. Why would I give it to anyone? It's mine. I bought it with my own money, 130 pounds of my own money at that. You can't just have it. Why are you so mean? He's only 8. Entitled kid. Mom, I want one too. I know, sweetie, I'm trying. I'll buy it from you for 50 pounds. Really? Yeah, sure. Let me go get the box. I walk inside, open my curtains, and turn the saber on again. While looking at the kid and his mother, I take the box and beat it to a pulp with the saber. I then grab my phone and pretend to call the police. I didn't. I just stood there with the phone to my ear saying nonsense into it. They left rather quickly. I proceeded to just laugh out loud for 5 full minutes till my neighbor knocked asking if I was all right. She saw what had happened from her window upstairs, so I told her, and she about wet herself laughing. Story 3. My, at the time, 7-year-old daughter loved to help with every little household task. She loved drying the dishes, watering the plants, sorting the mail, even answering the phone. So, whenever I'd have to take her to work with me or out on a boring errand, I'd try and find some small job for her to do to keep her occupied and feeling a valued part of things. For example, if we were at the grocery store, I might suggest she help the clerks by turning all the cans so their labels faced right side out, etc. And what was really helpful is that it allowed me to finish up the tasks much more quickly. So when I picked her up from school one day, I had to run to a home goods department store and grab a few things for an urgent repair. She was getting restless, so I parked her in the plumbing department and said she could be helpful to the store by going through their big row of pipes and returning the mismatched ones to their proper holders. Her dad's a plumber, so she knew all about which ones went where. Off I went to finish up a few paces over. I was occupied for all of 10 minutes and periodically peeked over to see how she was getting by. She'd moved on from the pipes after a bit, but was checking out other products and seemed entertained enough. So I take a couple minutes more and all of a sudden I hear, "Associate to aisle 14 please. We need an associate in aisle 14, in a young, chipper, 7-year-old voice. I dash back to the plumbing section and she's nowhere to be found. Then I hear, "It seems we have a birthday in the store. Happy birthday to shopper Nicholas Manikowski." In her unmistakably infused twang she took on when talking about something as exciting to her as birthdays. It was the most enthusiastic announcement this big box store probably ever heard. It brought on some clapping and whooping from shoppers that made it hard to discern the location of the box, but I could just barely pick out where the paw was coming from. By the time I got there, my daughter was engrossed in conversation with a young couple, not young like 7, young like 25, and was gesturing animatedly at a set of sink fixtures. I thought maybe she was asking them for directions to where I might be shopping or something, but instead I hear, "Oh yeah, you'll want the chrome extender. You'll never sweat the dishes again, and it's such a centerpiece in the room. This store also offers extenders in copper and—" I tapped her on the shoulder, unsure of why she was chatting up these shoppers about faucet add-ons, figuring she'd be relieved to see I'd found her. Instead she whips around and goes, "Excuse me, Mom, I'm with a customer," and turns right back to her discussion. So I throw my hands up and just hover in the background waiting to see how this all shakes out. Because if I already knew anything about my daughter, it's that when she's decided to do something, it's happening one way or another. So she continues talking to these two morons, unfazed by her age, about the sink, answering their questions and making suggestions. At first, I was flabbergasted by the fluidity with which she was generating these seemingly accurate responses, and wondering if she was sitting up at night watching the Home Improvement channel or something, but I soon recognized the lines. She was parroting her father's sales pitches from work, with some of her own editorials mixed in. He advises people on fixtures all the time, and his firm got a kickback if he could convince clients to buy from their supplier. The more add-ons the better, so she was laying it on thick. The couple left agreeing to purchase a whole new sink. If I didn't have to rush out to get another child from daycare, I would have badgered the store for a commission check. Haha. When my daughter wrapped up with her customers, I asked her what had just happened. She explained while she was sorting the pipes people kept coming up and asking her for advice. I guess I look smart. It took me a minute to figure out what had happened, because plenty of people who are actually of age to work in the place have been kneeling down rifling through the pipes, and they aren't mistaken for workers. I've certainly never been. It wasn't until checkout that it hit me. On this particular day, her class had gone on a field trip or put on a presentation day or something in which all of the children had to wear official name tags the teacher had drawn up for them. She was especially proud of hers and kept it right in the middle of her shirt. It was indistinguishable from the ones employees had on their vests. Just a standard red and white, "Hello, my name is Z." People were on such autopilot that they didn't process her age, or were so impressed by her unprecedented knowledge of plumbing goods that they set it aside. She confirmed that she knew exactly what to recommend from going to work with Dad. I asked how she ended up manning the POS system, and she explained another employee who'd seen her helping the store customers realized how helpful she could be, so asked her to make an announcement, just like I'd asked her to help sort those pipes, and she was happy to lend a hand. I asked how she knew how to operate a POS system, and, to my chagrin, she explained her older sister jumped on the POS system whenever she and her friends came by the department store. She often babysat and ran errands for me, so that was a good data point to have. And she added that someone she'd helped with a fixture decision had mentioned how he was remodeling his house for a 50th birthday present to himself, and she always loves it when the bowling alley announces birthdays. So she wanted to try and get the practice started everywhere with the capacity for announcements. And wasn't that a great idea? So, she most certainly did not work there, but she was just as helpful as those who did, and I guarantee she had twice as much fun. Story 4. I've always been a cautious person, especially when it comes to driving. My parents taught me that getting behind the wheel is a huge responsibility, and I took that seriously. Maybe too seriously, because that's what led to me failing my driver's test twice. It wasn't because I didn't know how to drive, I just got so nervous during the test that I made silly mistakes. My aunt, who we'll call Karen because that's exactly who she is, had been making snide comments about my failures ever since I failed the first time. She has this way of turning everything into a competition between her kids and everyone else's. Her daughter got her license on the first try, so clearly I must be incompetent. The car in question was a gift from my grandparents. They gave it to me for my 18th birthday, knowing I was preparing for my driver's test. It wasn't anything fancy, just a used Honda Civic that ran well and was perfect for a new driver. The car was officially in my name, all paperwork done properly. Last Sunday, Karen came over to our house for what was supposed to be a family lunch. I had just failed my second attempt at the test 2 days before, and I was still pretty down about it. As soon as she walked in, she started up with her usual commentary. "Karen, I heard about your test. Second time's not the charm, huh? Me, I'm working on it. I'll get it next time. Karen, you know, it's such a waste having that car just sitting in the driveway. My daughter could really use it for college." Me. The car's not just sitting there. I'm still practicing with it, and I'll be taking my test again soon. Karen. But that could take months, and my daughter needs it now. She's a good driver, unlike some people. My mom tried to intervene, but Karen was on a roll. Mom, that's enough. The car belongs to my child. Karen. Oh, please, what's the point of having a car if you can't even drive it? I'm thinking practically here. My daughter could use it, and when this one finally passes their test, we can discuss giving it back. Me, it's my car. Grandma and Grandpa gave it to me. Karen, don't be selfish. You're not even using it properly. Hand over the keys. She actually held out her hand, like I was just going to give them to her. When I said no, she completely lost it. She lunged forward and tried to grab my jacket pocket where she'd seen me put the keys. When I stepped back, she slapped me hard across the face. The room went dead silent. Then all hell broke loose. My dad, who'd been in the kitchen, came running in when he heard the slap. He's usually the calmest person I know, but not this time. Dad, get out of my house. Now. Karen, he's being selfish. The car is wasted on him. Dad, I'm calling the police if you're not out of here in the next 30 seconds. Mom, and don't ever think about coming back until you've gotten professional help. Karen started crying, playing the victim, saying she was just trying to help her daughter. Nobody bought it. My dad literally stood by the door until she left, then called my grandparents to tell them what happened. The best part? My grandparents were furious. They called Karen that evening and told her she was cut off. No more financial help with my cousin's college, no more generous Christmas checks, nothing. Apparently, they'd been getting fed up with her entitled behavior for years, and this was the last straw. 2 weeks later, I passed my driver's test. The first person I told was my grandma, who cried happy tears on the phone. Karen tried to apologize after she realized how much her actions had cost her, but none of us are interested in hearing it. My cousin ended up having to take the bus to college, and Karen had to explain to everyone why she wasn't invited to the next family gathering. Sometimes I catch myself feeling guilty about my cousin losing her college fund, but then I remember I didn't cause this. Karen's actions did, and from what I heard from other family members, my cousin actually apologized to me through them, saying she never asked her mom to try to take my car and that she was embarrassed by the whole thing. I still have my Honda Civic. Every time I drive it now, I feel a special kind of satisfaction, not just because I finally got my license, but because it reminds me that standing up to entitled people, even family, is sometimes necessary, and that slap, totally worth it for the karma that followed. Story 5. I need to start this story by saying this happened 9 years ago when I was a sophomore in high school. I had a couple of friends that lived in a neighborhood that only had one entrance. It was one of those fancy neighborhoods, but it was pretty average honestly, as it only had 1 or 2 actual fancy houses. This will come up later, so I wanted to preface with that information. My parents were on a trip to Vegas with a big group of friends from our smallish town, so I was staying at one of my friends' houses for about a week during this time. It happened on Wednesday night after school. The 3 of us, me, Adam and John, the friend that I was staying with, decided to walk and play around the neighborhood that night. It was about 9-ish at night, but it was in the summer, so the sun had just gone down. We stopped on the sidewalk and Adam hit John, stupid high school boy things. Laughing at him, and I ran up the road from John, who of course chased. We ran to the end of the road and laughed it off. It was at this point we heard someone back down the road yell, "I'm calling the cops." We were like, what? We thought someone was fighting or something, but just shrugged it off and walked to a nearby church that was located out of this neighborhood. Right as we left the neighborhood and started walking down the road the church was on, this lady in a black SUV, let's call her Karen, blew past us, slammed on the brakes, and pulled up on the sidewalk to block us. She was on the phone with the police screaming about how she found us, and we were wearing all black with our hoods pulled up. That we had run from her after we knew we couldn't hide in the neighborhood. I had a black fox sweatshirt on with a hat and my hood up because I was cold, and Adam and John had a dark red sweatshirt and black movie sweatshirt respectively. She made it sound like we were doing so to be able to hide. Adam and John kinda lost it and were calling her a crazy witch, etc., etc. I had a cooler head and calmed them down. I asked the lady what was going on, but at this point she was irate and would not be reasoned with. She screamed that we had tried to steal her son's dirt bike out of their backyard. Once I heard that, I was like, well, we need to just wait for the cops and we can get this worked out. After about 15 minutes, 3 cops show up and sit us down on the curb to get our side of the story. We had all calmed down and explained to the officer that we were screwing around and had heard the lady yell after, but we assumed she was just talking to someone else. He was really nice, took notes and sat us back down until the main officer got there. The first thing the main annoying officer did was that they had witnesses and we were lying. Adam, John, and I couldn't help but laugh in his face at how completely absurd that was. He questioned us one at a time and told me he knew we were lying. I said, okay, well, we did nothing, so where is your evidence other than the completely irate lady who had to be sent home because she was screaming at the cops too? Fast forward an hour and a half, they went and talked to some neighbors, and as it turns out, a couple of them saw us running down the road, then heard the lady scream, and that was it. No one ever saw us in her yard, or for that matter, even near her house. The annoying cop was still persistent, but all the other officers were super nice, and even told us that the main officer is an annoying man, indeed. Lol. Karen ended up picking my buddy John as the one who did it. It was a random guess, and the funny part is they lived 3 houses down and Adam lived 2 houses the other direction. She said she hadn't seen any of us before, which was nonsense because Adam and John lived on the same street and we were outside doing stuff at least 3 times a week in their neighborhood. They took John's statement and his parents came and picked us all up. End of the night. Fast forward about a month, John went to court with Karen, the annoying cop, and a judge. Upon hearing everything from each one of them, the judge literally laughed at both Karen and the annoying cop and threw the case out, expunged it from John's record, and slapped Karen with a fine. Turns out her son actually left the dirt bike in their driveway from that day and didn't want to admit to doing it. Now that was only part of the karma revenge. John's parents and myself took it upon ourselves to pass out letters explaining the situation to everyone in the neighborhood after Karen refused to apologize at John's parents' request. Karen was more or less run out of the neighborhood after that by people who apparently already had problems with her. They didn't do anything illegal to Karen, but she ended up moving 5 months later. Also, the annoying cop got a write-up once John's and my parents wrote a formal complaint to the PD for how he treated minors. Story 6. So this story took place at Fort Hood. Yes, the famous Fort Hood. It's now 2008, and I've been assigned to be the armorer for our brigade's HHC unit. HHC stands for Headquarters and Headquarters Company. Basically, it's the platoon that runs the regular day-to-day stuff such as troop management, ordering new supplies of a various nature, and of course equipment management. At least that's how I saw it. As an armorer, I basically look after the various weapons and sensitive equipment an Army unit might have. I'd been working at this unit for a few months and quickly acclimated. We had an awesome command team, amazing sergeants, and the troops were all pretty amazing at their duties. I was one of the only lower enlisted MPs in the unit due to my arms room schooling. But in general, it was not that big of a deal to see a specialist in charge of a section quite literally worth a couple $100,000 to $1 million in equipment. It took me a while, but I had built up a decent standing with several of the higher-ups through a positive work ethic and my get-it-done mentality. As for my fellow lower enlisted, well, back then I was a bit of a partier and was more or less welcomed with open arms. I had a good couple of months there before she walked in. For the sake of the story, I'll not refer to her by my special nickname. Instead, she'll simply be called Karen. You'll learn why in a bit. Now, Karen was originally from Brazil and spoke with a very strong accent, which was kind of endearing. She had also recently reclassified. She was originally a forklift operator, but the promotion points for that MOS were too high, so she transferred to supply. Initially, she came off as intelligent, yet friendly. I had even formed what I thought was a strong friendship at this point. Before she was promoted, we'd regularly hang out after hours. We'd go to lunch, get groceries, study for boards, and even have the occasional movie night. Throughout all of this, I had slowly developed a crush on her, but I'll admit she intimidated me professionally, and I believed she was out of my league. Probably a good thing with what eventually happened. So after she routinely won several Soldier of the Month boards, winning over everyone in the process, she was sent to a promotion board. As usual, she wowed everyone with her knowledge. It was later announced that she won the board, and we went out to celebrate that night with dinner and clubbing. A month or so later, she was promoted to sergeant and was made the inchoate of our supply office. Basically, she was a manager. Initially, things were good. She didn't overstep her bounds and remained professional all around. Then she started sticking her feet in the pool. It started small, first getting on another soldier for not doing his best at PT. To be fair, the guy was known to weasel his way out of PT, so his sergeant didn't see an issue with Karen making him run an extra mile. Also, the guy was a bit of a creeper to most of the females in and around our brigade, including Karen. I'm assuming she wanted some light payback. She then started outright abusing her authority. Anyone lower ranking than her, she'd speak in a condescending attitude, even going so far to pepper her dictation with various insults. When soldiers outside of her office brought this up to their chains of command, they were initially ignored since she was fairly well liked around our company, and they simply couldn't believe these rumors. Eventually, my buddy JB, as well another sergeant who I'll refer to as Uncle Sam, were brought in from my old line unit. JB was actually one of the single most competent supply clerks I've ever met. He really knew his stuff. Same with Uncle Sam. He was one of the best NBC guys, nuclear, biological, chemical, in the brigade as a whole. But with JB's reputation outside of those that knew him, he wasn't well thought of in a lot of remarks. Of course, Karen was aware of this and took full advantage. Every time JB would try to instruct her on how to do some important paperwork, Karen would just order him to do it. Her usual excuse was, "Because I'm the sergeant, that's why." So JB got stuck doing all of the dirty work and Karen got all of the credit. Of course, Karen got praised for her work ethic and professionalism outside of the HHC, but everyone slowly learned that Karen wasn't as up to snuff as she made herself out to be. Yet her arrogance continued to grow. Karen's ego had begun to grow now, and around this time, I'd become a regular target of hers. As I was the armorer, I technically fell under her, and after me and her had a disagreement over how she'd been treating people, she began to treat me rather harshly. I began to receive write-ups for the littlest things. Examples include multiple write-ups for not shaving, usually right after I'd had a 24-hour shift and no access to a razor. Getting written up for having a dirty uniform after I'd been working under a truck for Motor Pool Monday, vehicle maintenance. Being drunk on duty. This was a Saturday morning, but she tried to write it in such a way to make it sound like we had official business going on. Those were just a few examples, and after a while my counseling packets started to look like the leather-bound edition of War and Peace. Anytime anyone asked about me, my work ethic was slammed, and I was made out to be a lazy oaf. Even sergeants who'd previously worked with me began to believe Karen's stories, but there were a few who had my back. It wasn't long before Karen began to overreach her limits, though. Uncle Sam began to feel her wrath as she began to try and bad-mouth him. But his seniority and reputation around the brigade as a whole kept him afloat. Eventually, it got so bad that he refused to work with her and put in a complaint with our first sergeant and commander. Our first sergeant, whom I dubbed the Shield, I talked about him before, didn't want any fighting within his company and more or less told them to play nice. She then started butting heads with another NCO, our chaplain's assistant, who was a whole rank above her. The chaplain's assistant, who I'll refer to as the Paladin, had become a close friend of mine after I'd started seeking counseling with him and our chaplain. He was originally an infantryman with 2 tours under his belt, and the chaplain was formerly Special Forces, believe it or not. Both of them were two of the calmest people I'd ever met. But at the same time, they were the last two you'd want to mess with professionally and privately. They were two of my biggest supporters back then outside of JB and Mamasaurus. The other two became a surrogate family to a lot of us, even bringing us home-cooked meals on occasion. During one of my sessions with the chaplain, Karen came barging into the main office. She began to demand the chaplain release me so I could stop wasting her time. Her and the paladin began to have an increasingly loud dispute over this, which ended with the paladin telling Karen she could either leave his office through the door or the window in the next 10 seconds. Karen ran off to the shield to report the threat. The paladin and chaplain each stated their side of the events, and Karen was verbally reprimanded. After the reprimanding, Karen counseled me for wasting her time and tried to bar me from the chaplain's office, but was again reprimanded. These were the first negative remarks Karen had ever received in her career up to this point, and they did not sit well with her. While collecting my keys one day, Karen asked to take a look at some of the paperwork. I really didn't think anything of it and opened my arms room up for business. When she returned the paperwork, I took a look at it and noticed that it was missing several important stamps. Upon further investigation, I found that her name had been added to all of the important paperwork. You see, when you work in an arms room, you need at the minimum several levels of security clearance, as well as company orders and a bunch of other important paperwork. When I asked her about it, she said, "It's none of your business." She had forged government documents. When I further informed her of the trouble she could get in, I was further told, "You're not the NCO." "I am. Now get back to work." So that's what I did. About a month and a half later, I was on leave and home in Washington State for my little brother's wedding. About 3 days into my leave, I had received a text message from my then platoon sergeant, who I'll refer to as Big Sis, stating not to give Karen my PIN. I didn't think anything of it at first. Then I received a very angry call from Karen. It went roughly like this. "Hello?" I asked her. "Is that how you answer the phone when I call?" "Sorry, Sergeant. How can I help you?" "I need the PIN code to the arms room." "I can't give that to you. It's against federal regulations." "Then you need to come back as soon as possible." "That's not going to happen either." "Then I'll have your rank." She then hung up on me. Having an idea of what happened, I called Big Sis and asked her what happened. Stifling a giggle, Big Sis told me she'd tell me when I got back and to enjoy my vacation. I proceeded to receive 3 more phone calls from Karen, each more threatening than the last. I returned 13 days after the call and got an earful from both Big Sis and the Paladin. Apparently, while I was on leave, the Shield wanted to get some serious weapons cleaning done and had Karen open up the arms room. Since she did not have a PIN for the alarm, the MPs were notified. They asked her for the paperwork, and she provided the documentation she had rewritten. They quickly pointed out all of the issues I had pointed out almost 2 months earlier. She got reamed by the Shield and tried to pass the blame on me for not informing her of the issues. The Shield informed her that this was all on her. Despite the seriousness of all of this, she had only received negative counseling. This was her first official one. In her mind, it was all my fault. After I got back, she doubled down her efforts to ruin my career and what little reputation I had left, but she got what she deserved in the end eventually and got fired because of inappropriate acts that the higher-ups didn't approve of. It's kinda a personal issue to her, so I would rather not say what it is.